I want to move on to talk about this article. I believe I got it from Defense One, and it's been the talk of a lot of places. It's about the former U.S. envoy to the Syrian conflict, Jim Jeffries, and some interesting comments he made. At the start of the article, they highlight that Jeffries was a never Trumper and signed the Never Trump letter before Trump came in, but ends up getting the envoy position anyways. And then, even though he opposed the president's foreign policy, he says that the president's support of what he describes as successful real approach to the region, and acknowledges that he routinely misled senior leaders about troop levels in Syria. And so it's basically saying that he misled his superiors about the troop number in Syria. And I mean, this is real scandalous, right? Like, he's now out here bragging about this, and in fact, getting commended for it by a lot of people from like the U.S. foreign policy blob. But even with him, you know, getting this commendation from like the mainstream establishment, actually thinking about what happened here is rather disturbing. We talked about Mark Esper dragging his feet. Well, this is somebody even lower down the line. This is just the U.S. envoy to Syria, and here you have the president giving an order, and this guy who's not elected, and he may have to have getting confirmed by the Senate and everything like that, but still, he's the envoy to Syria. People don't think should be making U.S. Syria policy, and that's essentially what he did by lying and saying that we had roughly 200 troops there when that just wasn't the case, and made sure that we never actually ended that war. And man, I was watching part of the problem, and Dave Smith and Robbie Bernstein were talking about this, and Robbie Bernstein, being somewhat of a comedian, made a joke, but I think it's a pretty decent idea actually, and that is the American people should be able to sue Mr. Jeffrey here and say, listen, we're only supposed to have 200 troops there, so the cost of those additional 700 troops, since you're essentially the person that gave the order to keep them there, that tab is on you. And if any U.S. troops die or have died in that time, or the more than the 200, that those deaths are on you. He should be held accountable for that. Unfortunately, that won't happen. Like I said, he ends up getting praised. The other crazy thing is him going in another Trumper. He's coming out, I guess, a pro-Trumper, and saying that the Biden administration should stick with the Trump foreign policy in the Middle East. And when you look at what Trump's foreign policy for the Middle East was, you could look at it in kind of two ways. In one way, you see the president tweeted some really good things about ending wars. He backed down from launching strikes against Iran because of the toll after Iran responded with missile attacks after the U.S. The big mistake was assassinating the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani on Iraqi soil. But once that was done, he allowed the missile exchange to happen without a response, which there were times where Trump could have escalated in the Middle East, and didn't do that. I believe he really did shut down, for the most part, the U.S. support to the jihadists, the armed opposition to Assad in Syria. So, there are a couple things that Trump did right. But what Jeffrey is talking about is how the Trump policy actually played out, which was just continuing all the wars that he inherited and leaving U.S. troops in the Middle East. I'm sure threatening the Iranians is something that Jeffrey is a big fan of. And that's really the worst part about Trump's foreign policy in the Middle East, I think, when we look back on it, will be ruining the Iran deal. I think we'll look back on that, maybe not in the same way with George Bush getting out of the agreed framework with North Korea, because I don't think the Iranians are going to try to build a nuclear weapon. I think the politics of the region is different with Israel, who I think would nuke Iran before allowing Iran to build a nuke. And but at the same time, where you had this deal that would have relatively locked in Iran's nuclear program to make sure it's civilian, it takes the potential of war off the table, and rather getting out of that perfectly good deal, as Trump did with the JCPOA, sets the U.S. and Iran on a long-term collision course. kind of how we are now with North Korea, where it's going to take, real outside the Washington foreign policy, the DC blob establishment thinking, to change it. We had the consensus after Bush kicked them out of the agreed framework with North Korea was, well, you can't talk to them until they get rid of their nuclear weapons, and Obama had this policy of strategic patience. And then Trump first adopts a policy of maximum pressure and threatening very publicly North Korea, but then goes and meets with the leader and talks about potentially making some progress and developing better relations with North Korea. And so um I if it's now the case that the Biden administration will demand of the Iranians to return to all their commitments to the JCPOA before the U.S. decides to lift any of the sanctions, or I think Iran has a good case that the U.S. would have to lift the sanctions and then allow the Iranians to re-enter the agreement and all their commitments to it kind of slowly, since the U.S. it's technically out of it. But if that doesn't happen, the Biden administration makes a lot of demands here. We could see years of strategic patience, which I think that's the name of the policy and it sounds kind of smart, but what it really is putting hostilities on the back burner on low and letting them simmer rather than trying to address the situation in a way to take war off the table. And I'm very concerned about that's what's going to happen during the Biden administration with Iran. And I think that's, again, getting back to the original story here, what James Jeffrey is talking about, that the Biden is just going to continue a lot of Trump's policies and why he endorsed it.